Whilst many parts of the UK have an association with the devil, especially through place names, Shropshire has to rank high. Despite having avoided the excesses of the Puritans, their influence may be found in numerous mentions of the devil in its folklore. Throughout Shropshire, the devil is referred to in familiar terms, such as Uncle Joseph, Owd Nick, Owd Scratch, and Owd Mon. They portray a stark familiarity and a sense of personhood to the forces that the devil may represent. They portray a stark intimacy and perhaps sense of familiarity, cementing his place in everyday life. It's far less scary to talk about Owd Mon or Owd Joseph than Satan, Beelzebub or Lucifer. Folklore repeats the image of the devil as a trickster and tempter, feckless and yet astute. He's the arbiter of justice, a moraliser and yet wicked in his schemes. He can be absurd but also incredibly human in his portrayal. He's a character worthy of fear and yet the subject of pity, even ridicule. And while his characteristics are complex, but so are we, his intricacies make him even more enthralling. The folklore devil holds up a mirror to the world around us, and even when he is subject to fear, there is a sense of comfort and of humanity in these tales. The folklore devil is human in origin, a monster of our own imaginings. We serve as his creator. It is important to note that in Shropshire there's no evidence to suggest that the folklore devil represents an earlier belief in a pagan deity, or even a medieval concept of the devil. Many of the tales are surprisingly recent in origin and date from the 17th to 19th century. As Puritanism began to erode the traditional Catholicism of Shropshire, indeed there are many tropes found across the UK and even further afield in Northern Europe and Asia Minor. Robert de Bellem, circa 1052, and he died after 1130, the third Earl of Shrewsbury and the Count of Pontilo, was an Anglo-Norman nobleman. He's one of the most prominent figures in the competition for the succession to England and Normandy between the sons of William the Conqueror. Robert was believed to be the oldest surviving son of Roger de Montgomery, first Earl of Shrewsbury, and Mabel de Bellem. Various stories of his brutality were circulated after his death, probably inspiring the legend of Robert the Devil, a sadistically cruel Norman knight fathered by Satan himself. In January 1553, Shrewsbury was hit by an incredible storm, accompanied by pouring rain and thunder that seemed to shake the very foundations of the town, exacerbated as the night grew frosty. Putting it together in local parlance, fear gripped the town, and it was said the devil himself was visiting. This account was recorded in a pamphlet found in St. Altman's Church. Cloaked by the storm, he clawed his way up the spire of St. Altman's, destroying part of the clock on its way, which is still missing, and struck the bell violently, melting his imprint of his claws upon it, claiming it as its own. It was the fourth of Selham bells in which he left his mark, which was recast in 1812. It's believed that he still spends time in Shrewsbury, perching on the spire, or watching, especially over his chair, and waiting. Normally placid the devil, but if something displeases him, a storm will follow. Thus, when you hear the distant rumbles of the thunder, it probably means Owd Nick is unhappy. Philip James de Lauthenbourg, 1801, painting Coalbrookdale by night, captures the vociferal, almost uncanny quality of the industrial landscape. Along with the romantics, our understanding of the devil's role in Shropshire has strong associations with the Industrial Revolution, which turned a once agrarian landscape into a clear expression of hellfire and brimstone. a theme so common in the writings of Ruskin and Carlyle, but developed locally by Mary Webb. An Italian visitor wrote extensively of his stay in the area in 1887, stating that the approach to Coalbrookdale appears to be a veritable descent into the infernal regions. A descent column arose from the earth, a black cloud issued from a tower, which was a forge, and smoke arose from a mountain of burning coals, which burst into turgid flame. He then likens the landscape to a scene from the works of Virgil. This is such an evocative description, relating to the industrialised landscape, to its own form of pseudo-hell, a domain of a new kind of devil. How could the devil not dwell in such an otherworldly scenes? Jackfield was a hub of industry, and with its active port. Certainly it was described in the 18th and 19th century as having all the characteristics of a seaport, being made up of cheap lodging houses, brothels, and numerous public houses. Jackfield was not fit for polite society, and perhaps that is why, around 1896, the devil went down to Jackfield. He appeared at the Boat Inn in the run-up to Christmas, when one yearns for the warmth of drink and a log fire. Suddenly they heard the heavy doors swing open. There, stood in the doorway, was a strange figure. It quickly noted that he wasn't from the area, and he certainly seemed curious. His attire was dark and fine, far finer than anything they'd seen before. He smiled and implored them to play a game of cards with him. He told them it was a popular pastime, where he was from, and that he was the best player of them all. Some men refused openly, stating they'd come for a quiet drink, cursing him with colourful language, even raising their fists at him. However, the stranger used such soothing words, tempting them with promises of money, women, or even gold. To rouse interest, the stranger opened his coin purse to display his vast quantities of gold and coin. Some men were swayed then and agreed they would play, hoping they would gain their own fortune, or maybe rob him later if they lost. The stranger beat all who would take up his challenge, until the last challenger became more careless. He scattered the playing cards across the table onto the floor below. The stranger scrambled to pick them up, but before he could, the man had reached down and looked under the table. He was greeted by a pair of great black hooves. This horror was traditionally associated with West Shropshire, the Stiperstones, which too had their own industry connected to the landscape. The Industrial Revolution did not create the folklore devil, but rather created him and gave him a new purpose to the minds of those subjected to its rise. By 1595, the rock formations of the Stiperstones were already known as the Devil's Bridge, which was seen as the centre of his power. Cutting through the landscape are several imposing outcrops, the most famous of which is the Devil's Chair. The devil, whilst carrying a quantity of large stones, sometimes said to be from Ireland, in his apron, which he was planning to use to fill up a valley known as Hell's Gutter. The story also gets convoluted with that of the reeking giant. His apron string snapped, scattering the stones around him. This infuriated the devil, and even to this day he's said to jump down on the stones, trying to force them back to earth. Another story suggests that the devil uses the Devil's Chair, exactly as the name suggests, a chair or throne, to watch over the whole of the county and plan his evil deeds. A local belief says that if you spend the night sitting on the Devil's Chair, you will either be inspired or driven insane. Indeed, if you visited this desolate place, one can quite believe this. I grew up with the story that on the longest night of the year, the devil summons his worshippers, along with local witches. An inventory of species recorded in the churchyard of St Margaret's in Rattlinghope, or Ratchup as I know it, reads like a witch's spell. Hairy lady's mantle, smooth hawk's beard, cat's ear, nipwort, devil's bit scabious. On the Wrekin there's a feature known as the Devil's Dingle. The Devil's Hole stream, sometimes known as Lie Stream, runs in an approximately northeast direction and is a tributary to the Moor Brook, which in turn is a tributary of the River Severn in Moorfield. Warfield St Peter's Church spire annoyed the devil, spires being uncommon in the county. Thus every night he destroyed the previous day's progress in building the spire, with the church eventually being built where the devil had removed it to. This story appears to be linked to St Peter's Well in Warfield. There's also a very similar story about the former Broughton Church near Harmer Hill, and the birth pool in Bass Church and Stoke-on-Tern, a stretch of road which runs from Acton Burnell to Cardington. On this road a rough stretch of cobblestone pavement of about 30 yards in length, which is believed to be the remains of an old Roman road. However, folklore tells us that it was built in a single night by the devil to aid him on his nefarious travels. The stretch of road was known as the Devil's Causeway and is haunted by the devil. To this day the devil is believed to wander this road, still mostly appears to anyone who chooses to walk this path at night. Owd Nick takes the form of a man riding a white horse, sometimes with horns and hooves like a goat or cow, and far taller than a normal man. He is tasked himself with judging the souls of those who are caught out late. The causeway runs from a beautiful spring which drips into a rocky basin which is known locally as Frog Well. The spring has a long history, perhaps even predating Christianity, and has been used for centuries. Its waters are said to never fail, and is believed to have powerful healing properties for the eyes. But Frog Well is also a favourite for the devil, where the largest frog is the devil himself. Also nearby, Place Hall played host to the devil once. One Sunday night a group of clergymen descended onto the hall for an evening of gaming and merriment. They were drinking and enjoying themselves when one suggested they should play some cards. And so they began to play, and midway through the game the devil appeared. The men were stricken with fright, but managed to run away from the hall and to the safety of the surrounding area, except one man who was frozen stiff with fear and left alone with the devil. A few days later guilt got the better of the men, and they returned to the hall to try and understand what had happened to their friend. Upon arrival he was nowhere to be seen. However, in the spot where he once stood, a substantial bloodstain covered the floor. The bloodstain is said to be indelible, a reminder of Owd Nick's power. There also exists a feature known as the Devil's Mouth on the Longmynd. Or could this be the Devil's Mouthpiece on the Clee Hills? This is a depression on Sutton Hill in the Clee Hills, also known as the Devil's Mouthpiece. Given the abundance of minerals close to the surface of the Clee Hills, it's most likely evidence of a former quarry, whilst the Devil's Mouth on the Longmynd is a natural feature. Near Hordsley in Craven Arms there's a hill which has a boulder on top, known as the Devil's Stone. It's believed that children used to gather berries and place them in the holes of the stone as an offering to the devil, and if you run around the stone 20 times, he would appear to you. A similar story comes from a field near Rattlinghope, or as I call it, Ratchup. At the Devil's Rocks near Downton Castle, Ludlow, one can see footprints of the devil where he dances. In Clunbury there is a chapel, the building known as Chapel Farm, A widespread belief states that Chapel Farm became a farm due to the devil's campaign of terror, including at the local church. Eventually, the congregation of the church fled in terror, leaving it abandoned. Offa's Dyke was once believed that the landmark was a furrow cut by the devil in a single night with a plough. This was no ordinary plough, however. It was pulled by the gander and a turkey, which is certainly an evocative image. We're told that the Clear Hills was a stronghold of the devil, with many who would dwell under his power. In 1915, the women of Prees and Whitchurch claimed that the rector at Idfield had secret dealings with the devil. They informed that the rector sacked a garden boy for being cheeky, sending him on his way back to the village. He bumped into the boy later in that day. After this encounter, the boy started to feel strange and quickly fell ill. 3 days later, the boy died, having shivered ceaselessly since the fateful conversation.